Nadia had exactly 4 minutes to finish mopping the east corridor before the family came downstairs for breakfast, and she already knew she was going to be blamed for something she did not do. The crystal vase on the console table near the staircase was cracked. She had noticed it the moment she arrived at 6 in the morning, already cracked, tilted sideways on its base, as though someone had knocked it without quite knocking it over. She had not touched it. She had not gone near it. But she knew. The way a person knows a storm is coming not from the sky but from a slow pressure behind their eyes, that by 9 o'clock someone in this house would point at her and say she had broken it. This was the Calloway estate. This was simply how things worked here. She wrung out the mop with both hands. The water ran gray and cold into the bucket at her feet. Her lower back ached from the previous night's extra shift, a shift she had not been asked about but had been informed of at 8 in the evening, 20 minutes before she was supposed to leave, because the evening staff had called out sick, and Nadia was, in the coordinator's words, already here anyway. She had stayed. She had said nothing. She had cleaned 3 bathrooms, 2 kitchens, and a long sitting room that smelled like expensive perfume and red wine that had been left to breathe too long and overturned. She was good at saying nothing. She had been practicing it for 2 years. The house was enormous in the way that houses are enormous when the people who live in them have never once had to think about the cost of keeping them warm or clean or standing. 12 bedrooms, 4 separate living areas, a dining room with a chandelier that took Nadia 45 minutes to dust properly, and a garden beyond the French doors that she was not technically responsible for, but was sometimes asked to help with anyway, in the vague and expectant tone of a person who considers their own rules to be flexible when flexibility serves them. The Calloway family had owned this estate for 3 generations, a retired banker named Philip, his second wife Louisa, and their daughter Camille, who was 24 years old and had never worked a day in her life. That was not a judgment on Nadia's part. It was simply an observable fact, as plain as the vase on the table. Nadia pushed the mop bucket around the corner of the corridor and nearly collided with Elena, the other maid on morning shift. Elena was small and quick-moving, and she grabbed Nadia's arm to steady herself before letting go again just as fast, the way people let go when they remember they are not supposed to be too visibly sympathetic towards someone they feel sorry for. There were rules in this house, spoken and unspoken, and the unspoken ones were the ones that mattered most. "Camille is already up," Elena said quietly, her voice nearly absorbed by the walls. She came down early. That was not good news. Camille early meant Camille with unstructured time on her hands. Camille with unstructured time meant Camille looking for something to fill it, and the things available to her in this house included a television, a kitchen stocked with things she rarely touched, and the staff. Nadia nodded and steered the bucket toward the supply closet. She moved with the practiced efficiency that people who do not look closely might mistake for contentment. She was not content. She was calculating. There was an enormous difference between the two, and it existed entirely inside her head, in a space where Camille Calloway had no access and no authority. She locked the supply closet and checked her watch. 6:52. She had time to finish the corridor, to wipe down the console table near the cracked vase with careful and deliberate hands, ideally with Elena visible at the far end of the hallway so there would be a second account if anyone ever asked, and to position herself in the kitchen before the family came down. The kitchen was the safer territory. In the kitchen there was always something occupying her hands, and people who are visibly occupied with their hands are harder to stop and humiliate without the performance of it becoming obvious to anyone watching. Camille was already in the corridor, standing near the console table with her phone raised, pointing the camera at the vase. She was wearing silk pajamas, and her hair was perfect in the particular way that suggests a person has been awake for considerably longer than they appear, has spent part of that time arranging the appearance of having just woken up naturally, and without effort. People who are genuinely effortless do not usually work at looking it. Camille worked at it continuously, and called the result effortless, and that specific dishonesty had told Nadia everything she needed to know about her within the first week. Camille turned when she heard Nadia's footsteps on the floor. "Oh good, you're here." She gestured at the vase with 2 fingers, her phone still loose in her other hand. "Did you do this?" Nadia stopped walking. She looked at the vase. She looked at Camille. She kept her voice level, and her face completely clear of everything that was actually in it. "No, it was already cracked when I arrived this morning. I noticed it at 6. I have not touched it." "So you just left a cracked vase sitting there?" I was going to report it to Mrs. Calloway after breakfast. Camille tilted her head. She had a specific expression she used in these moments, something that lived in the space between amusement and contempt, like a person watching something smaller than itself attempt something it simply was not designed to manage. You were going to report it, she said. Right. She raised her phone. Not at the vase this time. At Nadia. The camera click was deliberate and quick, followed by a small, satisfied exhale. For my page, Camille said, in the tone of someone saying something unkind, without expecting to be held accountable for it. Don't worry, I'll blur your face. Probably. Nadia did not look away. She did not apologize. She did not fill the silence with the nervous stumbling that Camille was clearly waiting for, the flushing and the fumbling and the visible distress that would make the moment useful as content. She simply stood with her hands at her sides and waited. Waiting, she had learned, was its own kind of response, and it was the one that Camille Calloway had never developed a strategy for. Camille grew bored of it more quickly than expected. She lowered the phone and moved toward the kitchen, trailing the faint, expensive scent of her lotion. Make sure the orange juice is from actual oranges, she called back without turning around. Not from a carton, I can always tell. Nadia turned to the console table. She wiped it down carefully and completely. She made sure Elena was visible at the far end of the corridor the entire time, close enough that if anyone ever asked, there would be a second account of what Nadia's hands had done and had not done. Small protections, built one at a time, over months, because no one in this house was going to build them for her. She went to the kitchen and juiced the oranges without being asked a second time. She did it the way she did everything in this house, completely, correctly, without complaint, because she was not here for the orange juice or the vase or Camille's entertainment. She was here because of Theo. Her brother was 22 and had made a very bad decision 18 months ago, the kind that young men make when they are running out of room and someone arrives offering a solution that sounds almost manageable at the time. He had borrowed money. Not from a bank, from people who do not send polite letters when payment is late. They send other kinds of messages entirely, the kind that make a person's voice go flat and tight when they call their older sister from a number she does not recognize at 9 in the evening and say what he had to say. She had listened to him explain the amount and the name of the company, with the calm of someone who has decided to handle a thing and is now gathering the facts needed to handle it. She had spent 3 days tracing the name through 2 subsidiaries to the company behind it, Calloway Integrated Holdings. Then she had applied for the maid position at the Calloway estate. She was not here to clean floors. The floors were incidental. Somewhere in this house, in the locked filing cabinets on the 2nd floor, or behind the paneled desk in the office, there was a record of Theo's debt, some document she could photograph. Some ledger showing that the terms had been altered in ways that were not legal, something she could take somewhere and use to get her brother free. 7 months later, she had not found it. She poured the orange juice into the crystal pitcher and carried it to the dining room. On her way back, she passed the corridor near the back stairs and heard Gerald, the estate coordinator, speaking to Elena in the low and deliberate voice he used when he wanted to be heard by the right people and not the wrong ones. She takes up too much space near the family's areas, Gerald said. She moves too slowly in the main corridor. There have been comments from Camille, 3 this week alone. Elena said nothing. She had learned silence too, for her own reasons. Nadia kept walking, same pace. She turned the corner and stood in the linen closet for 45 seconds with her palm flat against the cool wooden shelf, looking at the towels. Then she went back to work. She had learned not to let things arrive until later, when she was alone and the house was quiet, and she could feel them without an audience. Dignity, as she understood it, was not the absence of being hurt. It was the ability to choose when and where the hurt was allowed to land. That evening, after the staff had gone and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, she stayed an extra half-hour outside the locked 2nd-floor office. She stood near the old banker's desk and listened to the house breathe, and tried the handle of the locked drawer for what she counted as the 417th time. Still locked. She was pulling on her coat at the back door when Gerald appeared, clipboard in hand. "The new owner takes possession next week," he said, looking at the clipboard rather than at her. "You will be expected to prepare the master suite." "Who is the new owner?" she asked. Gerald made the small sound he used when a question was slightly beneath his dignity. "A Mr. Voss," he said. "Damien Voss." He walked away. He did not see what happened to Nadia's face. She stood at the back door with her coat half on and her hand on the handle, and she let the name move through her slowly, the way cold moves through a room when a window has been left open. She had heard that name before, not in the Calloway files, much further back than anything she had found in this house. Somewhere she had deliberately stopped revisiting a long time ago. She pushed the door open and walked out into the night. By the time she reached her apartment and climbed the stairs and sat down on the edge of her bed, she had begun to understand that what she was in had just become something different. She did not yet know what it had become. She was very much afraid she was about to find out. But she stayed. 7 days. That was how long she had to decide whether to leave before the new owner arrived. She told herself she was staying because the drawer was still locked, and the debt was still real, and she had not found what she came for. She told herself that on all 7 days. By the last one, she mostly believed it. Damien Voss arrived on a Thursday morning with 2 dark vehicles and 4 people who walked beside him, in the quiet, attentive manner of those whose profession is to observe everything, while appearing to observe nothing. He came through the front door of the estate without pausing in the entrance hall the way new arrivals almost always paused, without the brief stopping that people do when they are absorbing something not yet comfortable enough to claim as their own. He did not stop. He looked at the hallway, and then he looked further into it, and he moved through the space as though the decision to be here had been made a long time ago, and all that remained was the simple business of completing it. He was tall. His coat was dark and plain and expensive in the way that only very particular kinds of expensive look, the kind that does not want to announce itself. His face was still and watchful, the face of a person who receives information continuously and shows very little of what he does with any of it. 35 or near it, he looked like a man who had stopped visibly aging because the internal pace of him had overtaken whatever the calendar was doing on the outside. Nadia was at the far end of the entrance hall when he came through the door. She was carrying a stack of clean linens, and she had positioned herself there deliberately because she had wanted to see his face before his face could see hers. She wanted the small advantage that looking first gives a person. She wanted the half-second to observe before being observed. He came through the door. He took in the hallway, and then, before she expected it, he looked directly at her. Not through her. Not past her toward something more interesting on the other side. At her. Straight and full and steady. The way a person looks at something they actually intend to understand, rather than simply register. She kept moving. She had the linens and a direction, and she used both of them to carry herself around the corner before the look could settle into anything she would have to account for. Behind her, she heard him speak to Gerald. His voice was low and measured, and it did not perform authority. It simply carried it, the way things carry what they have held long enough that it has become part of their weight. She went upstairs and made the master suite with complete and careful attention. Clean corners on the linen, precise alignment on every surface, each windowsill wiped in the proper order. She did not let herself think while she worked. In this house, thinking and working were best kept separate. The work used her hands and her body, and asked nothing of the part of her that was trying to hold everything together. She thought anyway. The name, 7 years ago. She had been 21 and carrying a first aid kit in her bag because her clinical instructor had made the whole cohort carry one for the first year, said it was the habit that would eventually save someone's life, and she had thought at the time it was the kind of thing instructors said to feel like they were preparing their students for something real. Then one evening she had missed the 9 o'clock bus and taken a shortcut through the parking structure on Gerber Street and found out that her instructor had been right. A man on the cold concrete floor. The kind of stillness that was not rest. She had known immediately, from 2 semesters of theory and from something in her that recognized the difference between a person choosing to be still and a person who had no other option, that she was the only one who could change what was about to happen. She had not walked away. She had talked to him the whole time, because voices help, her instructor had said that too, and she had believed it, and so she had talked about the bus she missed, and the textbook she was carrying, and the way the parking structure smelled like rain-soaked concrete and motor oil, and she found it, strangely, not entirely unpleasant. She had talked about anything ordinary she could reach with her mind while her hands worked, because ordinary things were what kept people in the present, and the present was where they needed him to stay. He had kept his eyes open. She had made absolutely certain of that. She smoothed the last corner of the fitted sheet and stepped back and looked at the bed, and then picked up her supplies and went back downstairs. The afternoon moved through the estate the way afternoons do in large houses, slowly and full of small repeating tasks that blur together after the first hour. She polished a mirror in the second guest bathroom. She replaced the towels in the hallway closet. She carried a box of cleaning supplies from the ground floor to the third and back again, because Gerald had reconsidered where they were needed. And in between all of it, she watched. She watched the way Damien Voss moved through the house. She was not following him, she was careful about that. She was simply noting the way she noted everything in this estate, because information was the only real currency she had ever had consistent access to, and she had never been careless with currency of any kind. He moved through rooms without lingering in them. He asked precise questions about maintenance records and financial arrangements that Gerald answered with visible discomfort, because the questions were specific in the way that only someone who already understands the full picture asks specific questions. He did not eat lunch. He made 2 phone calls in the library. She did not hear the words, but she heard the tone, which was the tone of a person conveying decisions that have already been made. Late in the afternoon, Camille's friends arrived. 2 of them, talkative and carrying bags, and the house shifted the way it always shifted when Camille had an audience. A loosening, a relaxing of whatever invisible pressure usually ran just beneath the surface, because Camille used witnesses the way some people used furniture, as a way of making a room feel like it belonged to her. Nadia was crossing the sitting room to collect a tea service when Camille noticed her. Camille's attention moved toward her and stayed there, which meant she had decided to make use of the moment. "There she is," Camille said, not to Nadia but to her friends, in the specific tone of a person narrating something for an audience. "She has been here practically forever. She is essentially furniture." One friend laughed. The other looked briefly uncertain and then decided uncertainty required too much energy. "Careful," Camille added, as Nadia lifted the tray. Heavy load. 2 layers in those 2 words. The surface one perfectly deniable, the real one understood by everyone in the room. Nadia had stopped being surprised by it many months ago. She had stopped letting it arrive in real time around the same period. She was working on something harder than either of those things, which was not minding it at all. She was not there yet, but she was working on it, quietly and without announcement, the way she worked on most things. She carried the tray to the kitchen. She stood at the sink with the water running and let the sound of it fill the space in her head where other things were pressing. The footsteps she heard a moment later in the corridor outside were not Gerald's precise, self-important step. They were even and unhurried, and they stopped just outside the kitchen doorway. She turned off the tap and turned around. Damien Voss was in the doorway. He was not looking at her yet. He was looking at the kitchen itself, the organized shelves and the clean surfaces, and the way the tools were arranged with the kind of order that tells a careful observer that someone has thought deliberately about the system, rather than simply putting things where they fit. Then he looked at her. "Is there coffee?" he said. "Yes. How would you like it?" "Plain." She poured it. She set it on the counter near him rather than in his hands, because proximity in this house had always been something she managed carefully, a habit built over 7 months that she could not simply discard because the person in front of her was different from the people who had made the habit necessary. He picked up the cup. He stood at the window and looked out at the garden. He drank slowly. "You have been here some time," he said. 7 months, she said. He nodded, the slow nod of a man connecting new information to something already in motion in his mind, rather than adding it to an empty register. "And before that," he said. "A different position," she said, carefully. He looked at her then, not the brief glancing attention of polite social interest, the full, direct attention of a person who is actually listening and who intends to hold what they receive. It had a quality different from anything she had encountered in this house, and maintaining her expression against it took more effort than she had expected. He finished the coffee, set the cup down, walked back out of the kitchen without saying anything else. She watched the empty doorway for 3 seconds, then she went back to work. That evening, Gerald called the staff together and announced preferences from the new owner. Quieter mornings, no staff in the main wing after 8. All communications to go through Gerald directly. Standard language, the kind that sounds like policy, and is actually about establishing territory. She listened. She nodded. She noted, without showing she was noting it, that Gerald had not looked at her once during the announcement. Gerald always looked at her when he delivered rules. He liked to see whether they landed, liked to observe the small adjustments people made when they understood that the rules were aimed at them specifically. The fact that he was not looking at her now meant that something had shifted in a way that inconvenienced him, and he had not yet decided how to respond to it. She found out 40 minutes later, passing through the back corridor, catching fragments of Gerald's phone call spoken in a voice lower than his usual register. Made it very clear she is not to be reassigned. Yes, her specifically. He did not explain his reasons. She kept walking, same pace. She turned the corner and stood in the linen closet, which had become without any particular planning the place in this house where she kept things that needed to be understood before they were ready to be understood. He had been in the estate for less than a day. He had spoken to her for 6 minutes. He had drunk 1 cup of coffee and asked 2 questions, and then he had done something that no one in this house had done for her in 7 months. She did not know what to do with that. She was careful about not knowing, because the alternative was assigning a meaning she did not yet have the basis for, and she had not survived this house by assigning meanings without support. She folded a towel, put it back on the shelf, went back to work. That evening, near the end of her shift, she was dusting the bookshelves in the second-floor study when the door opened behind her. She kept dusting. "You can stop," said his voice. She stopped. She turned around. He was standing near the desk and he was holding a piece of paper and looking at it with an expression she had not seen on his face in the day and a half he had been in the house. Careful and contained on the surface, but underneath it, something pressing upward from a long time ago, like a word that has been held in for so long it has changed shape. He looked up at her. He set the paper on the desk. "This is the estate's household register," he said. "Previous staff, previous years." He paused. "Your name is in here, not for this year, for 7 years ago. A single-night contract logged through this company." He looked at her directly. "That is not where you actually were that night." Not a question. She did not answer immediately. She stood in the quiet room and let the 7 years between Gerber Street and this house exist in the same space for the first time. "The parking structure," he said quietly. "On Gerber Street." She was 21 years old for exactly 1 second. The cold concrete floor and his breathing, which had been shallow and wrong, and her own hands steadier than she had any right to expect of them, and her voice going on about ordinary things, the bus and the textbook and the smell of the air. "Yes," she said. "Gerber Street." He sat down in the chair behind the desk, slowly, deliberately, the way a man sits when he has just received something that requires him to reorganize a significant portion of what he thought was already settled. She stood where she was and let him take the time he needed. Outside the study windows, the evening had gone completely dark. The house was quiet around them in its nighttime way, and the 7 years that had lived between that parking structure and this room had finally arrived, without ceremony or announcement, in the same place at the same time. She had been in the house for 7 months, and she had learned the geography of it the way you learn the geography of any place you inhabit, consistently, not just the rooms and corridors, but the way the light moved through it at different hours, the sounds it made when the temperature changed, the particular silence it held at different times of day. She knew that the 3rd step on the back staircase made a sound if you put your weight on the left side of it and not the right. She knew that the mirror in the second-floor hallway was slightly tilted to the left and had been for years, from the look of the fading where the frame met the plaster. She knew that the light in the east corridor was strongest at 9 in the morning and again just before 5 in the afternoon. She knew all of this because she had been paying attention, and she had been paying attention because attention was the only tool she had that did not require permission to use. She had also been paying attention to the locked drawer. 14 months and 417 attempts, and the drawer had not opened for her once. She had tried picking it. She had learned the basics of it from an internet search on a slow Sunday evening, and she had tried it 3 times and failed each time, and then put the tools away, because the risk of being caught was more than the potential reward of a method she was not good at. She had tried looking for a spare key, systematically, in the places that spare keys lived in large estates, in the back of desk drawers in other rooms, in small labeled boxes in the supply areas, behind the loose molding near the 3rd-floor bathroom, that looked like exactly the kind of place someone might tape a key. Nothing. The drawer had stayed locked and the months had passed, and she had kept looking because she had nothing else to do in the evenings when the house was quiet, except sit in her small room and read, and she was not going to sit in her small room and read when there was still a drawer she had not found a way into. And then the name had arrived, and the drawer had stopped being the point. She was still thinking about what the name meant. 3 days into the new ownership, when she overheard something that shifted her understanding again. She was carrying linens down the main corridor at mid-morning and she heard, from behind the closed door of the library, Gerald's voice in a phone call. She caught only one sentence clearly, and she caught it because her name was in it. He asked specifically about her, Gerald was saying. I don't know the reason. He asked before he even looked at the register. She kept walking. She kept the pace exactly the same. He had asked about her before he found the register. Before he had any official record connecting her to anything, he had asked about her from something older than that, something that had nothing to do with the household documents, and everything to do with a parking structure and a name exchanged in the dark 7 years ago. She had thought, for 3 days, that the protection of her position had been a practical decision, the decision of a man who wanted to keep his household stable during a transition, and had made a cautious early call about which staff members to retain. She had thought that because it was the explanation that required the least from her, the explanation that did not require her to examine what it meant that a man had held her name in his attention for 7 years. She was not sure she was ready to examine that. She was also not sure she had a choice, because the information had arrived, and she was not the kind of person who could receive information and then simply decide not to know it. She went back to work. She dusted the east corridor shelves and she cleaned the third-floor bathroom, and she replaced the hand soap in the guest suites, and she kept thinking, turning the information over, the way you turn something over when you are trying to find the angle at which it makes sense. By the time she was standing in the second-floor study that evening, with the dust cloth in her hand and the sound of the door opening behind her, she had arrived at something close to understanding, not complete understanding, but enough to stand still when he told her to stop and turn around and look at what he was holding. He looked at her across the desk for a long moment without speaking, and she let the silence stand. She had spent 2 years in a house where silence was rarely allowed to mean anything. She had learned to value it. I had people looking for you, he said finally. The week after Gerber Street, the address you gave me wasn't current. I moved several times that year. Student housing. I was never in one place very long. By the time the search was properly organized, you had moved twice more, and the trail was gone. He said it plainly, not as an apology, and not as a justification. It was simply the sequence of what had happened. I filed it away. You spent resources looking for a person you met for 40 minutes on a concrete floor, she said. I spent resources looking for the person who kept me alive during those 40 minutes, he said. That is not the same thing. She held that. She could not immediately argue with the distinction because it was accurate. Why did you tell Gerald I was not to be reassigned? She asked. You had been in the house for less than 6 hours when you gave that instruction. You had not found the register yet. He was quiet for a moment. His hands were flat on the desk and he looked at them briefly before looking back at her. Your face, he said. When I looked at you in the entrance hall the first morning, something in me was already working on it, not consciously, not in any way I could have explained, but the recognition was already there, moving below everything else, trying to surface. He met her eyes. I have learned not to dismiss that particular feeling before I have found the explanation for it. She nodded. She believed that. It matched everything she had observed in him since the day he arrived. I need to tell you something, she said, about why I am actually here. He watched her without moving, without the subtle shift that people make when they are bracing themselves. He simply watched. I did not come to this estate to work as a maid, she said. I came because of my brother. His name is Theo. He is 22 years old. 18 months ago, he borrowed money from a company called Callaway Integrated Holdings. The original amount was manageable. The way it has grown since is not legal. I spent 3 days tracing the company back through 2 subsidiaries to this estate, and then I applied for this position so I could find documentation, a ledger, a contract, some record that showed the terms had been altered without agreement, something I could take to someone who could help. She looked at the desk rather than at him. When I applied, I did not know your name was part of this network. I was looking for Callaway records specifically. He did not react with the calculation she had prepared herself for, the particular tightening that powerful people make when they discover someone has been searching through their business inside their own house. He looked at her with the same steady, focused attention, and his expression held nothing she could identify as a threat. How much does he owe? He said. She told him the number. He asked 2 more questions, clean and precise, one after another, like a person constructing something from the answers, rather than simply collecting them. The name of the account manager, Theo had been dealing with directly. The point at which the terms had changed from the original agreement. She answered both completely and without hesitation, because she had been carrying the information alone for 18 months, and the relief of saying it to a person who was genuinely listening was something she had not been prepared for. It moved through her differently than she expected, lighter and heavier at the same time, like setting something down that has been held so long it has changed the shape of your hands. He picked up his phone. He made a call. She listened to 6 sentences. She caught 2 things clearly: the account manager's name, and then, at the end, said without particular emphasis or drama, "That account closes tonight." He set the phone down. She stared at him. "The man running that account has been diverting funds," Damien said. "Your brother's was one of several accounts being treated the same way. He has been doing this for 14 months. I have had an unresolved concern about that subsidiary for some time, but I lacked the specific documentation I needed to act on it without dispute." He looked at her steadily. "Your brother's records gave me that documentation. You would have found it yourself eventually," she said. "Probably. Eventually takes time. Tonight it did not." He held her eyes. "The original terms of your brother's debt, applied at the legal rate, accounting for what he has already paid back, result in a credit balance in his favor. He is owed money, not the other direction. The letter will reach him within the week." The room held that for a long moment. 18 months. She had carried the weight of it every single day. Behind every morning she had walked through the back door of this house and picked up a mop. Behind every hour spent searching locked drawers that would not open. Behind every evening she had gone home and called Theo and listened to the specific tight quietness in his voice and told him it was going to be resolved without knowing for certain that it would be. And now the man sitting across from her was telling her not only that it was gone, but that it had been wrong from the opposite direction the entire time. She did not cry. She was not built for crying in front of people she did not know well. But her hands were in her lap, and they found each other and held on, and she let them do that. "I don't have the right words for this," she said. "You don't need them," he said. "We are nowhere near even." She looked at him. 7 years ago, on a concrete floor, you spent 40 minutes keeping me alive, using a convenience store first aid kit and a piece of your own jacket lining," he said. His voice was steady and plain, the voice of a person stating a fact that has been a fact for a long time. "I have been aware since that night that I am walking around because of you. There is nothing you need to thank me for." She could not construct an argument against that, so she did not try to make one. After a moment of quiet, he said, "What will you do now?" With the reason for being here resolved, she had not thought past the problem. She had been so completely inside it for so long that the other side of it was simply blank, an open space without furniture. "I was going to leave," she said. "The job was never the point." "I know. I should renew my nursing license," she said. It came out smaller than she had intended. It had the quality of something true, and true things arrived without the armor that other statements came wrapped in. She looked at the bookshelves she had dusted so many times and waited for the smallness of it to embarrass her. "It did not," he said, without looking away from her. "The license behind the mirror in the staff quarters." She looked at him. "You noticed that?" "First day. I was not looking for it specifically." She had placed it there as a reminder to herself. She had looked at it every single morning for 2 years and said the word soon in the back of her mind, and then the mornings had piled onto each other, and soon had become a word she no longer examined too closely. "You could have renewed it at any point in the last 2 years, he said, plainly, the way he said everything, without the sharpness that would have made it unkind. "Yes," she said, "I know. Why didn't you?" She thought about it honestly, which she had been avoiding for a long time. "Because if I renewed it, I would have to apply for a residency, and if I applied and was not accepted, there would be nothing to go back to. The license behind the mirror could not be rejected. It was still a possibility. A residency is real. Real things can fail." He was quiet. Outside the window the night was fully dark. "Possibilities that stay possibilities are very safe," he said. "Yes," she said. "They are." He looked at her with an expression she could not entirely read. And it was not pity, she was certain of that. And it was not judgment. It was something more careful and more patient than either of those. "Go," she said. "It is late." He stood when she stood. She reached the door and his voice came, quiet and level. "Don't disappear again." She did not answer him. She walked out of the study and down the stairs and out the back door, and kept walking until the night air was fully around her, and the lights of the estate were well behind her. She went home. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the nursing license behind the mirror for 11 minutes. She knew it was 11, because she checked her watch when she sat down, and again when she finally reached for her phone. She found the residency application in 4 minutes. The deadline was 11 days away. She filled out the form that night, all of it, every section, until it was done. The walk home took longer than usual that evening, not because the distance had changed, but because she walked without rushing, which was something she had not done in a long time. She had a habit, developed over 2 years of shifts that started early and ended late, and bled into each other at the edges, of moving through the world with purpose and destination, of walking the way she worked, efficiently, and with the destination already settled in her mind, before her feet started moving. Tonight she walked without that efficiency. She let the city happen around her. She thought about the conversation in the study, and tried to see it from the outside, the way you try to see something clearly by imagining you are not the person who is inside it. A man she had helped 7 years ago on a concrete floor in a parking structure had turned out to be the new owner of the house where she had spent 7 months searching for a document she never found. He had recognized her not from the register but from some deeper and faster kind of recognition, the kind that operates below the level of conscious thought and surfaces as unease before it surfaces as understanding. He had protected her position in the household before he knew why. He had resolved her brother's debt in the time it took to make a 6-sentence phone call. She was not naive enough to think that any of this made him a simple person. A man like Damien Voss did not reach the position he held by being simple, or by being without cost. She understood that the network he operated within, the subsidiaries and the holdings and the flow of money through structures that were legal but required a particular kind of knowledge to navigate, she understood that those things did not exist without a person willing to inhabit them fully, without concession. She was not unaware of what that meant, but she was also someone who had spent 40 minutes on a cold floor keeping a stranger alive, because he was there, and she was there, and she was the only one who could do it. And she knew, with the certainty of a person who has learned to read people quickly and accurately, that the man who had stayed conscious and said the name of the street out loud, just to know where he was, that man had not become someone without a sense of what one person owed another. The debt paid correctly, he had written on that letter not yet sent, but already decided in his mind. She turned the corner onto her street. The building was ahead of her, its windows lit in the various ways that different lives light windows at different hours. She paused at the front door and looked up at the city sky, which was never fully dark but held a kind of darkness anyway in the spaces between the lit things. She went inside. In her apartment, she changed out of her work clothes and sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the envelope containing everything she knew about Theo's debt, the notes she had made, the subsidiary documents she had photographed, the calculations she had done in margins and on the backs of old receipts. She laid them out in front of her and looked at them for a long time. They were already unnecessary. The account was already closed. The letter was already in motion. Everything she had been trying to build a case with for 7 months had been made irrelevant in a 6-sentence phone call, and she sat with that for a moment, not resentfully, but with the particular feeling of a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a long time, and suddenly finds it gone, and is not quite sure yet what to do with the hands that had been holding it. She gathered the papers together carefully. She did not throw them away. That felt too abrupt, like discarding something before you had finished understanding it. She put them back in the envelope and set the envelope on the shelf above the desk, where she kept things she was not ready to deal with yet. Then she washed her glass, dried it, put it away, and went to look at the nursing license behind the mirror. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about being 21 and in her first year of clinical studies, and her instructor saying, with the matter-of-fact conviction of a person who has seen enough to know what they are talking about, that every student in that room would eventually face a moment that would tell them whether they were in the right profession or not, and that the moment would not look the way they expected it to. The parking structure on Gerber Street had not looked the way she expected it to. She had been 21, and exhausted from a long study session, and irritated about the missed bus, and carrying a textbook she had not yet read all of, and a first aid kit she had not yet needed, and a certainty about the direction of her life that she had worn the way young people wear certainties, easily, without examining the weight of them. And then there had been a man on a concrete floor, and the certainty had stopped being about direction and had become simply about the next 30 seconds, and then the 30 seconds after that, and then the ones after that, until 40 minutes had passed, and the man's breathing had steadied, and she had been sitting back on her heels looking at her own hands and understanding something about herself that she had not previously understood. She had stayed in medicine because of that night. Not because of the drama of it, because of the steadiness. Because she had found out, in conditions she had not chosen and would not have chosen, that her hands were steadier than her mind expected, and her voice was calmer than it had any right to be, and she was able to be present for someone, in a way that actually mattered. Not in a theoretical way, but in a real and immediate and physical way. She had needed to know that about herself. The parking structure had told her. And then she had let the license lapse because the debt was there, and Theo needed money faster than a residency could provide it. And she had told herself it was temporary, and then the temporary had stretched, and the license had gone behind the mirror, as a reminder that she had not quite stopped believing in. She was done with temporary. She went to the kitchen table, she opened her laptop, she found the residency application and she read through every section and she began to fill it in. It took 2.5 hours. She was thorough about it. She answered every question with the same care she brought to the work she was good at, completely, correctly, without cutting corners, because she was not going to let the application be the thing that was less than her best, when the application was the first real step toward the thing that should have been hers 2 years ago. When she was done, she read through it once more. Then she submitted it. She closed the laptop. She looked at the time. It was late, later than she usually stayed up on a work night. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about nothing in particular, which was not something she was often able to do. The ceiling looked back at her, uninformative and patient. She fell asleep before she expected to, which was its own kind of answer. 3 weeks after she submitted the application, the acceptance letter arrived on a Wednesday evening while she was sitting at her kitchen table with a pharmacology textbook open in front of her and cold rice in a bowl at her elbow. The email notification appeared on her phone and she opened it expecting something administrative, a confirmation or a scheduling request, and read the first line 3 times before it felt like a thing that was actually happening. She called Theo. He made a sound she would not easily forget, not a word, just a sound, the kind a person makes when something they have been holding themselves rigid against for a very long time suddenly lifts from them without warning. She let him talk for 20 minutes straight without interrupting him once, which she almost never managed, because he had earned every one of those 20 minutes, and she needed to hear his voice doing something other than being afraid. The formal resolution of the debt had already reached him. A letter from the subsidiary company, brief and official, confirming that his account had been reviewed and found to contain errors in the application of terms, and that the balance was cleared with no further payment owed. He had called her the afternoon it arrived and read it to her twice, each sentence spoken twice before moving to the next, and she had said yes and I know, and it is done, until each of those things had settled into him at the level where things actually become real. She gave her notice at the estate the morning after the study conversation. Gerald received it with an expression she could not entirely read, which was unusual because Gerald's expressions were generally legible. He did not put much effort into concealing them. This one held something she could only identify as a kind of relief he would not have called by that name if someone had pointed it out to him. She completed the remaining 2 weeks with the same thoroughness she had always brought to the work. She was complete and methodical, and she made no visible distinction between the first week and the last. The floors deserved to be properly cleaned regardless of who she was or what she had found or why she was leaving. That had never been about the floors. On her final day, Camille was in the sitting room when Nadia walked through to collect a tray. Camille did not look up, just a person in a room, indifferent to the furniture leaving. Nadia picked up the tray and carried it to the kitchen and stood at the sink for a moment. She thought about the photograph taken in the corridor months ago. She thought about what it means to be made into someone else's content, someone else's proof of their own elevation. She thought about the kind of armor a person builds when that happens to them for long enough, and about the fact that armor, eventually, becomes its own weight. She set the tray down, washed it, dried it, put it away, and walked out through the back door for the last time. She did not look back. She was looking forward. The residency was hard in the exact right way. Not cruel, not arbitrary, but demanding in the specific manner that requires all of you, and then a small amount more. The hours were long and her feet hurt by mid-afternoon on the long days, and she read at night until the words on the page lost their edges, then started again before she felt ready, because readiness was not a condition that arrived on its own, and she had always understood that. It was something you built by beginning before it showed up. Her supervisor was Dr. Harriet Bloom, who was exacting and precise, and offered no praise that was not genuinely earned, which made the praise, when it came, the kind you could actually hold on to because it had not been handed out in advance. Nadia liked her immediately, which was not the same as finding her easy. The other residents were younger by several years, most of them, and some had the smooth, uninterrupted confidence of people who have moved from one expected stage to the next without any gaps between. She did not resent that. She was interested in it the way she was interested in most things, with curiosity and without judgment, and with the specific attention of someone who has learned to understand people by observing what they do when things get hard. She called Theo every Sunday. He had found work at a logistics company that he was not passionate about, but that he showed up to reliably every morning, which was the part that mattered most. He sounded lighter with each call. He sounded like the version of himself she had been missing for 18 months, the one that existed before the weight of the debt had changed the timbre of his voice, and she had not fully realized until she could hear it clearly again how much she had missed that version of him. She did not think about the estate constantly. Sometimes she thought about the study and the specific quality of the lamplight, and the way the conversation had moved, through recognition and then honesty, and then arrived at something she did not have a precise word for. She thought about the last thing he had said in the doorway. She set it down again each time, because she was a practical person, and practical people do not spend extended time on things they cannot yet act on. She told herself that fairly often during those weeks. The envelope arrived on a Saturday morning. Plain, no return address, her name printed on the front. She opened it at the kitchen table with her coffee still steaming. Inside was one sheet of paper bearing the letterhead of her residency program. Below it, a letter confirming a full-year funding sponsorship through a private foundation she had never heard of. Unconditional, non-repayable, covering all program fees and providing a monthly stipend for the duration of the year. She read it twice. Then she looked below the official text, at the bottom of the page, where 4 words had been written in plain handwriting. A debt paid correctly. She sat with it for a long time. The coffee went cold beside her. The morning light moved across the table in the slow, patient way of light that is not in a hurry. She thought about the parking structure, the cold concrete and his uneven breathing and her own hands, steadier than she had any right to expect at 21 years old, and the way she had talked about ordinary things the whole time because voices help. Her instructor had said that. She had believed it, and so she had talked about the bus and the textbook and the smell of motor oil and wet concrete, and the fact that she found it, strangely, not unpleasant. He had kept his eyes open the entire time. She had made absolutely certain of it. She set the letter down. She picked up her phone. She looked at it for a moment. She had memorized a number on her last day at the estate, from a phone left unlocked on the library table while she collected a tray. She had memorized it without making a decision about it, the way you sometimes do things you are not ready to decide on yet. She called it. It rang twice. He answered on the third. You did not have to do it that way, she said. No opening, no approach. She had never been good at those. No, he said. I didn't. Silence. The comfortable kind. The kind that exists between two people who have already said the difficult things and no longer need ceremony around the straightforward ones. The program is good, she said. I know. Dr. Bloom is extremely difficult. I've heard. She paused. How have you heard that? A brief quiet on his end, I asked. She looked at the letter on the table. She looked out the window at the Saturday street, ordinary and still. The parked cars, the neighbor's child on a bicycle going in slow, careful circles in the space in front of the building, getting better at it with each loop, not knowing yet that they were getting better, just going around and around in the morning light, until the balance stopped being a thing to think about and became simply true. Theo got a small promotion, she said. Good. He wants to thank you properly. He said he needs to say it to the right person directly, not just say it out loud to the general air. Sunday dinner. Next week. It is not necessary, Damien said. He knows. He wants to do it anyway. She held the phone easily. He spent 18 months being afraid. Let him have the dinner. A pause. Then, all right. 6 o'clock Sunday, she said. She gave him the address. He did not ask her to repeat it. She had not expected him to. Nadia, he said. Yes. How are your hands? She looked at them, resting on the table beside the letter, the hands that had worked in a house that did not deserve the care she gave it, the hands that had filled out an application form late at night while a nursing license watched from behind a mirror, the hands that had been steadier than they had any right to be on a cold concrete floor a long time ago. Steady, she said. She heard him breathe out, slow and even, the specific exhale of a person who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has been given permission to set a small portion of it down at last. Good, he said. She ended the call. She set the phone down beside the letter. She picked up the cold coffee and drank it, because she had never been the kind of person who wasted things, and because some things do not need to be more than what they already are. The residency consumed her in the exact way she had hoped it would, completely, and without leaving much room for anything else, which had been the point. When you were building something real, it asked all of you. That was what made it real. She worked long days and longer nights, and she read in the spaces between. She ate quickly when she remembered to eat, and she slept as much as she could, and she showed up every morning to the wards with the specific and grounded energy of someone who has been working towards something for a long time, and has finally arrived inside it. Dr. Bloom noticed that. She did not say so directly, but the assignments she gave Nadia began to shift after the first month, became more demanding in ways that assumed more from her, which was Dr. Bloom's version of acknowledgement. She learned things she had thought she already knew, and found that knowing them in a classroom and knowing them in a corridor with someone in front of you were two entirely different categories of knowledge. She learned that her instincts, the ones she had discovered on the floor of a parking structure at 21, were reliable and trainable, that they responded to experience the way all good instincts did, by becoming more precise rather than louder. She learned, also, that there were other people in medicine who were in it for the same reasons she was, not the ones they said in interviews, the helping people, the making a difference, all the things that were true but insufficient, the ones they said to each other in the break room at 2 a.m. after a long shift, the real reasons, the ones that were more complicated and more specific and more honest. She found those people, and she recognized them, and they recognized her, which was its own kind of belonging. She called Theo every Sunday. He had gotten a small promotion at the logistics company, which he described with the tone of a person who is moderately pleased about something and does not want to overstate it. She told him to overstate it. He laughed. The laugh was light and unguarded and completely like him, the version of him she had been missing, and she held the phone and listened to it for a moment, and felt grateful in a way that was clean and simple, without anything complicated underneath it. She did not spend much time thinking about what happened next with Damien. She thought about it occasionally, the way you think about a door you have noticed but have not yet decided to open, aware of it, not urgently. She was building her life back into its proper shape, and that required most of her attention, and the door would still be there when she had the capacity to think about it clearly. That was her practical self talking, and she listened to her practical self because her practical self had gotten her through a number of things that did not have obvious solutions. The letter with the funding sponsorship arrived on the Saturday morning she had described to him on the phone, and after the phone call she sat at the table for a long time with the cold coffee and the letter, and she thought about the 4 words at the bottom and what it meant that he had chosen those words specifically. A debt paid correctly, not cleared, not settled, correctly, as though the manner of it mattered as much as the fact of it, as though the question was not just whether something was done, but whether it was done in the way that the thing deserved. She thought about that for a while. She thought about a man on a parking structure floor who had said the name of the street out loud just to stay anchored to where he was, and about what it took to be that precise about a thing when the thing was very difficult. She thought about how that kind of precision did not come from nowhere, how it was built from practice and from a particular orientation toward the world, a belief that things should be done correctly, or not at all, that the shortcuts people take when something is hard enough are usually the things that cost the most in the end. She thought he was someone who paid correctly or not at all. She sat with that until the morning had moved on, and the coffee was definitively cold, and then she called him, which she had been deciding to do for longer than she would have admitted. The Sunday dinner was planned that afternoon. She spent the rest of the weekend cleaning the apartment, not because it was not clean, because she was the kind of person whose apartment was always clean, but because she needed something to do with her hands while she thought, and cleaning was the thing she had always done best with her hands, while her mind was occupied with something else. She thought about the dinner. She thought about what it would be to have Theo in the same room as Damien Voss, the two poles of the thing she had been living inside for 7 months, the person she had been protecting, and the person who had ultimately made the protection possible. She thought about what it meant to have the thing resolved, actually resolved, not in the way she had originally imagined, not by finding a document and taking it somewhere and making a case, but by something more direct than that, by a man who paid debts correctly, making one phone call in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. She thought about how things resolve, how often they do not resolve the way you planned them to, how sometimes the resolution is better than the plan, and how you have to be willing to accept that, to receive a good thing, without holding it at arm's length because it arrived by a different route than expected. She was willing. The dinner was its own kind of resolution. Theo at her table, saying the right thing in the right way to the right person. The evening easy and warm and genuinely funny in moments she had not anticipated. Damien at a corner table in a restaurant with warm light on a Wednesday evening, a chair already moved by exactly the right amount before she reached it. She thought about how you get somewhere by staying, how many times she had considered leaving and how different the story would have been if she had. She was glad she had stayed. The coffee on the Saturday morning was cold when she finally picked it up, and she drank it anyway, because she was the kind of person who did not waste things, and because she had learned that what is real and present and here is worth more than what might have been if things had gone differently. Here was enough. Here was more than enough. Here was, in fact, exactly right. The Sunday dinner was a quiet thing, held in Nadia's apartment at a table that seated 4 comfortably and 3 easily. She had made food that required real attention to get right, because she was not the kind of person who did things halfway when she had the option, and because she had spent enough time cleaning other people's tables to have clear opinions about what made her own worth sitting at. Theo arrived 20 minutes early, which was unlike him, and told her everything about how much the evening meant to him without him having to say it. He was 22, and he looked it. Young in the face but with something behind his eyes that had not been there before the last 18 months. She had noticed that the last time she saw him in person, and she noticed it again now. Some things leave a mark. Not all marks are damage. Some are simply evidence of having been through something real. He helped her in the kitchen without being asked, moving around the space in the easy way of someone who grew up in his sister's kitchens and knew where things lived. They did not talk much while they cooked. They did not need to. The comfortable silence between them was old and familiar, and it asked nothing of either of them. Damien arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, not 5 minutes before, not 1 minute after. She opened the door and he was standing in the corridor with the same stillness he carried everywhere, and he held out a bottle of wine that was plain labeled and almost certainly excellent, and he said good evening, and she stepped back from the door to let him in. She introduced them. Theo shook his hand and said his name, and then stood very still for a moment looking at Damien with an expression Nadia recognized, the expression of a person trying to locate the right words for something that does not have a ready-made version. Then Theo said, quietly and directly, "You gave me my life back. I don't know how else to say it. I have been trying to find the right words since the letter arrived, and that is the closest I can get." Damien looked at him. "You were owed what you got," he said. "It was not a gift. It was a correction." Theo nodded slowly. "Still," he said, "still." They sat down to eat. The conversation found its level in the way that conversations do when the people at the table are not performing for each other, something easy and genuine, and occasionally funny, because Theo was naturally funny in the specific way of people who have learned to find the absurdity in hard situations as a way of surviving them, and because Damien, it turned out, had a dry and understated sense of humor that surfaced occasionally and quietly, and was funnier for being unexpected. Nadia ate and listened and watched the two of them talk about ordinary things, logistics companies and city traffic, and the weather that had been strange that autumn, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time, something uncomplicated, something that did not require her to hold anything together, or keep anything contained, or carry anything carefully enough that it would not break. After dinner, Theo helped her clear the table, and then said he should get going because he had an early shift the next day, which may have been true, and may also have been the tactful exit of a younger brother who understood the shape of an evening better than he was usually given credit for. He hugged her at the door, which he did not do very often because they had not been raised in a particularly demonstrative household and both of them tended toward words rather than gesture. She held on a little longer than usual. He let her. He shook Damien's hand again on the way out, and he said something she did not catch because she was putting away the last of the dishes, and then the door closed and it was quiet. She came back out of the kitchen to find Damien standing at the window, looking out at the street below. He had his hands in his pockets and his coat over the back of the chair, and he looked, for the first time since she had known him, simply present, not managing anything or deciding anything, just standing at a window at the end of an evening. She sat down on the couch and put her feet up and looked at the ceiling. "He looked good," Damien said, without turning from the window. "He is good," she said. "He is getting there. You got him there." "He got himself there," she said. "I just removed the obstacle." He turned from the window. "You came to that house with no allies, no guarantee of finding anything, and you stayed for 7 months in conditions that did not deserve your presence. That is not just removing an obstacle." She looked at him. "I had reasons of my own to stay." "Yes," he said. "But you also stayed." She looked at the ceiling again. The apartment was quiet around them in the good way. Not empty quiet, but full quiet. The kind that exists when the right people are in it. "I have been thinking," she said, "about the residency, about where I want to specialize." "And," he said. "Emergency medicine," she said. "I was always going to end up there. I just took a long route." He was quiet for a moment. "Gerber Street," he said. "Before Gerber Street," she said. "It was always going to be emergency medicine. I just needed Gerber Street to confirm it." He moved from the window and sat down in the chair across from her, and the room settled into its quiet around them. Outside the city was doing what cities do at night, moving and lit and indifferent in the necessary way. "The woman who ran the subsidiary," she said, "Gerald's supervisor, the one above the account manager who was diverting the funds, is she still in the position?" He looked at her steadily. "No." "Good," she said. She had not asked about Camille. She did not need to. She had heard from Elena, who had texted once since Nadia left, that Camille's carefully curated presence on social media had encountered some unexplained difficulties. Several accounts had stopped functioning in the way they were supposed to. Several venues Camille had relied on had become unavailable. Camille was attributing it to technical problems. Elena had sent the message with no additional commentary, which was its own kind of commentary. "You didn't have to handle that," Nadia said. "No," he said. "I didn't." "Thank you," she said. Not for Camille specifically, for the understanding of what it had cost her to spend 2 years in a house that treated her the way that house had treated her, and the quiet acknowledgement of it. He nodded. He did not make more of it than it was, which was one of the things she had come to appreciate about him, that he did not make things into more or less than they were. The evening stretched out comfortably between them. She asked about the estate and what would happen to it. He told her it was being restructured, that several of the subsidiary arrangements were being unwound, and the assets redistributed to the main holding company in a cleaner configuration. She asked if Gerald still had a position. He said Gerald was competent and had mostly followed instructions rather than issued them, so, yes, for now. She nodded. That was fair. He asked about Dr. Bloom and the residency schedule, and whether she was sleeping enough. She laughed at the last one, a genuine laugh, because the answer was obviously no, and he knew it, and he had asked anyway. He looked at her when she laughed, and something in his expression shifted into something warmer. Not much, just enough to be visible. She noticed. She did not say anything about it. Some things are better left in the room where they happen, without being named too quickly. Eventually he stood and put his coat on, and said it had been a good evening, which it had, and she stood and said yes, it had been. She walked him to the door. He paused in the doorway. "Emergency medicine," he said. "Emergency medicine," she said. "You were always going to end up there," he said. "Yes," she said. "I was." He looked at her for a moment, with that full and steady attention she had learned was simply how he looked at things he considered important, and then he said good night, and walked out into the corridor. She closed the door. She stood in her apartment in the quiet left by the evening. Then she went to the kitchen and washed the remaining dishes and dried them and put them away, and when she was done she went and looked at the nursing license where it still was, behind the mirror, though it was no longer behind the mirror as a reminder of something she had not yet done. It was there now as something else, evidence of a long road taken by a longer route. Proof that arrival, when it finally happened, meant more for having been made to wait. She looked at it for a moment. Then she turned off the light and went to bed. 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday evening, she was walking home from the hospital along the same route she had taken 50 times before when she passed a restaurant with warm light in the windows. She looked in through the glass, the way a person looks when they are walking and thinking about something else entirely. He was at a corner table, alone, looking out at the street. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. He did not wave. He did not gesture. He just looked at her with that full and steady attention that takes everything in without making any performance of it. She stood on the pavement, behind her, the hospital with its long corridors and its antiseptic smell, and its continuous purposeful motion that never fully quieted. Ahead, her apartment and her textbooks, and the good fatigue of a day that had required everything she had brought to it. All of it real. All of it still true. She looked at the door of the restaurant. Then she pushed it open and walked inside. The warm air came around her. She crossed the room and sat down across from him without asking, because he had already moved the chair out slightly, just enough, before she reached it. The waiter came. She ordered coffee, because she was practical, and had a chapter to read tonight, and some things do not need to be made into something more elaborate than they already are. He picked up his glass. "You found me," he said. "I found the restaurant," she said. "You were a coincidence." He looked at her over the rim of the glass. "I don't believe in coincidence," he said. "I know," she said. "You have made that very clear." He had not said it in those exact words, but she had read it in everything, in the way he operated, and the way he had held her name somewhere in his attention for 7 years, without knowing if it would ever be useful, and in the way a chair moves out by exactly the right amount before the person reaches it. She had read it and filed it, and apparently it had taken up residence in a more permanent part of her than she had intended to give it. The coffee came. She held the cup in both hands and let it warm them. Outside, the street was ordinary and nighttime and full of people going where they needed to be. She was exactly where she needed to be. She was not in a hurry about it. He drank his drink. She drank her coffee. Neither of them spoke for a while, and neither of them needed to, because there is a kind of silence that is its own kind of conversation, that holds more than words would, and asks less of the people inside it. She thought about the parking structure on Gerber Street, the way she had come to it by accident, and left it having done something real, without knowing yet what it had set in motion. She thought about 7 months in a house that did not deserve her, and how she had stayed because the drawer was locked, and Theo needed her to stay. She thought about a study at the end of an evening, and the specific quality of the lamplight, and a piece of paper that confirmed something that had been true for a long time, but needed a place to finally land. She thought about steady hands. She drank the rest of her coffee. It had gone slightly cool while she was thinking. "Same time next Wednesday," he said. He said it as though it were already decided, which, she realized, it probably was. She looked at him. "You don't believe in coincidence," she said. "No," he said, "I don't." "Then you had better be here," she said. He looked at her with something in his expression that she was choosing not to name yet, because some things are better left unnamed until the right time arrives, and she had learned, over the past several months, that the right time was patient. It waited. It stayed exactly where you put it until you were ready to come back to it. She stood. He stood. She put on her coat. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She walked out into the ordinary street, and the night air, and the city doing what it always did, and she walked home with the particular lightness of someone who has come through something long and difficult, and arrived, finally, at the other side of it, where the ground is solid, and the light is better, and the next thing is already waiting, not as a threat this time, but as a beginning. What she had not expected about the Sunday dinner, what she had not been able to anticipate even with all her careful planning of the food and the timing and the arrangement of the chairs, was how ordinary it would feel. Not in a disappointing way. In the way that the right things, when they finally arrive, tend to feel less dramatic than you expected, and more solid, more real. Theo talked about his new job, not the promotion, though he mentioned that too, but the actual work, the specifics of it, the people in the warehouse who had taught him things about logistics that he had found, to his own surprise, genuinely interesting. He talked about a colleague named Barry who was 63 years old and had worked there for 30 years, and had opinions about the correct method of stacking pallets that he expressed with a ferocity that Theo found both alarming and deeply endearing. He talked about the commute, which was long, and about the podcast he had found to make it bearable, which was about the history of cartography, which was not something he had ever been particularly interested in before but which turned out to be more interesting than he would have predicted. Nadia listened to him talk and felt something she had been missing for a long time, which was the ordinary version of her brother, the version that existed when he was not afraid, the version that wandered into unexpected interests and had opinions about his colleagues, and was funny about the right things in the right way. She had missed that version so specifically and for so long that having it back at her table felt like something she needed to handle carefully, as though it might disappear again if she was not attentive enough. Damien listened to Theo talk without the particular kind of patience that is actually thinly disguised waiting. He listened with actual attention, asked a question about the cartography podcast that was specific enough to suggest he had actually processed what Theo had said, and then they talked for a few minutes about the history of maps and borders, and how much of what felt permanent was actually recent and somewhat arbitrary. And Nadia sat back in her chair and watched the two of them, and thought that this was probably not what either of them had expected the evening to look like, and that it was better for that. Later, after Theo had gone, she stood at the kitchen sink washing the plates, and Damien came and stood beside her and picked up a dish towel without asking, because drying dishes was something that needed to be done, and he was there and it was obvious. She did not comment on it. She handed him the plates as she finished them, and he dried them and set them on the rack, and neither of them said anything for a while. "He is going to be all right," Damien said eventually. "Yes," she said, "he is. So are you." She looked at the plate in her hands. She rinsed it and handed it to him. "I know," she said. "I was always going to be all right. That was never the question." He looked at her. What was the question? She thought about it. Whether I was going to be all right on the right timeline, she said. Whether the things I was working toward were going to arrive before I had waited so long for them that I had become a different person on the other side. He set the dried plate on the rack. "And? I think they arrived in time," she said. He picked up the next plate and dried it and set it down. They finished the dishes. She dried her hands on the dish towel and then stood at the counter for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. "The residency is good," she said again, because it was still true, and she had not yet stopped being glad about it. "Emergency medicine," he said. "Emergency medicine," she confirmed. "It is the right fit," he said. "I know," she said. She looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because you are better in situations that do not allow hesitation," he said. "In situations that require you to be completely present and make decisions with incomplete information. Those are not comfortable situations for most people. They are comfortable for you." She looked at him for a moment. It was accurate. She had not known that he had been observing her closely enough to see it, or that he would say it that directly. "Is that how you see me?" she said. "It is how you are," he said. She did not argue with it, because he was right, and because she had learned that the people who see you accurately are worth listening to when they speak. She went home. She opened her textbook. She read until she was ready to sleep, which took longer than usual because she was thinking about things that were not in the textbook, and eventually she set it aside and turned off the light. Outside her window, the city went on. It always went on. That was one of the reliable things about it. She closed her eyes. She slept.